So many states and localities are responding to nationwide protests in a pretty clearly unconstitutional way. So this is in The Intercept. A North Carolina city bans protests protecting Confederate monument. A North Carolina city is using a restrictive ordinance to outlaw protest, threatening to arrest anyone who even attempts to peacefully protest without a permit as part of an effort to protect a Confederate monument that sits outside its courthouse. The Alamance County Sheriff's Office said in a Facebook post on Friday that permits to protest in the city of Graham will not be granted for the foreseeable future, adding that anyone who attempts to protest without a permit will be in violation of the order and arrested. There has been a heavy police presence around the monument, which features a statue of a Confederate soldier with a rifle located in downtown Graham for several days now. Graham, whose population is around 15,000, also declared a state of emergency and set a 9 p.m. curfew over the weekend, which was then canceled on Monday night. So, they go on to explain that what they do is if anybody shows up to protest, they're arrested. But then the argument people would make is you got to go through the proper channels in order to be allowed to protest. Okay, well then people apply for permits. The problem is none of the permits are being granted at all. So you've set up a situation where you've de facto banned protests. Where you say, hey, in theory we allow protests, but we're going to arrest you on site if you show up without a permit, and if you apply for a permit, we're not going to give you one. So that is effectively banning protests. Now, where are all my free speech warriors at? Where's Rafe Dubin? Where's Ben Shapiro? Where's all the people on the right who claim that they care so deeply about freedom of speech? You know, it's curious. They only seem to bring it up when it's pink-haired college kids setting up safe spaces on campus. That's the only time they bring it up. They never seem to bring it up when it is actual, literal free speech violations, as in the government taking away people's rights for free speech and free protest. Weird, they're nowhere to be found. Clear violations, not just of the principle of freedom of speech, the legality of freedom of speech is being violated. I don't hear anything. I don't hear Dickie McGee's axe. Now, you might say, well, hold on, Kyle, this story just happened, so obviously, maybe they're not keeping up with the news, maybe they didn't see it, whatever. You got to give them a pass on this. Obviously, they still care about this issue. This is a brand new thing that just happened, and they didn't see it yet. Wrong. So in 2017, this happened as well. Republican lawmakers in 5 states proposed bills to criminalize peaceful protests. Now, in 2017, similarly, this was a direct reaction to Black Lives Matter movements, the No Dakota Access Pipeline protests, but also it was immediately after the women's marches. So it was right after this, a number of circumstances popped up which led to unrest and protests, and Republican states immediately sprung into action and said, let's find a backdoor way of banning protests. So in North Dakota, for example, there was a bill that would allow people driving to run over and kill protesters obstructing a highway because they were protesting on highways. And they say, oh, as long as it was an accident, you can do it. They allowed murder by vehicle if it's an accident. In Minnesota, there was a bill to dramatically stiffen fines for protests on the road and give people a year in jail for that. A year in jail. Republicans in Washington state proposed a plan to reclassify as a felony civil disobedience protests that were deemed, quote, economic terrorism. Economic terrorism. And then Republicans in Michigan introduced an anti-picketing law that would increase penalties against protesters. So in many instances, they wanted to make it a felony to be part of a protest. This is not new. This is not new. And, you know, Trump does the same thing where Trump says, in his speeches, he will say, we believe in free speech. We believe in freedom of speech. And then in the same speech, he'll say, you know, I think we should punish up to a year in jail anybody who burns the flag. Anybody who burns the flag, we should punish them with a year in jail. You just said you believed in free speech, and now you're saying, like, the quintessential example of freedom of speech is not free speech. That's what they're arguing. There was a Supreme Court case in 1989 over burning the flag, and Justice Antonin Scalia, right-wing justice, was like, well, obviously, I wouldn't burn the flag, and I'm against the people who do it, and if I was king, I would lock them up, but I'm not king. We have a constitution, and that's freedom of speech. In the same speech, Trump would say, I believe in freedom of speech, and let's lock people up who burn the flag, which is free speech. They're hypocrites, and they're idiots, and I'm so sick of this stuff, man. Whenever a real free speech issue pops up, nobody on the right's anywhere to be found. The only people who are left standing are the ACLU, and actually for them, who knows if they're doing it anymore, but back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the ACLU was like, they would defend anybody on free speech grounds. Because it doesn't matter the content of what they're saying, it matters that they have the right to say it. It's a principled stance that they're taking. Well, here we go. Here we have a situation where they're trying to criminalize protests, and I hear crickets on the right. Remember this. If you actually care about this issue, remember this. Remember who's actually a proponent of free speech and who isn't.